Hey there. Welcome to the Gyro Step, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and GSPN, and presented by our pals at Prize Picks. I am Ty Windisch, joined as always by my lovely co-host Rohan, Katti, and a super special guest, Rohan. Let the people know what they're about to be subjected to in a good way. Does that have a negative connotation?
It does.
What they're about to be treated to.
Yeah, I was going to say subjected. What are you talking about?
Not what I didn't mean
this
it
is an
way.
incredible
I know. Now I bungled it.
So we are happy to have Jim Owczarski of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel on this podcast, and we talk about a lot of fun things. Most importantly, his latest feature that dropped recently on Damian Lillard. He got to go to Portland, hang out with him during his camp, talk to him about a lot of fun stuff, about being a Buck, a lot of that journey, his journey, a lot of good stuff. We don't talk about all of that in the interview, so make sure you check that out. It's called Bucks Guard. Damian Lillard reflects on the transitional year in Milwaukee, looks forward to big season, and we got a teaser that more stuff is coming soon from that trip. So
get that subscription to the JSN going. You do not want to miss this.
Yeah, make sure you subscribe there to read that article and make sure you're ready to get all of Jim Owczarski's coverage as the Milwaukee Bucks season is right around the corner. But yeah, it's a super great interview. We get into a lot of fun stuff about the feature, about the Bucks at large. Can't wait for you all to listen to it. And make sure you, if you want to listen to this commercial free, you could listen to it using our premium subscription over at gspn.info, $8 a month, exclusive podcasts, exclusive written articles, commercial free pods for all GSPN podcasts, just a lot of bonus content there. So make sure you check that out as well. But yeah, without further ado, here's our interview with Jim Owczarski.
All right, we are here with Jim Owczarski of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Very excited to discuss the Milwaukee Bucks in general and specifically your great feature on Damian Lillard going out to Beaverton, Oregon, I believe. Probably saw some other, or I don't know if you can fly into Beaverton. You'll have to let us know, but we're super excited. So I think first to start off here, Jim, would just love to hear how did this come about? You know, what was I guess the conversation with Dame or his team, and what made you want to go be able to attend this in person outside of the obvious, getting to connect with Dame more and tell more of his story to your readership?
Yeah. No, I flew into Portland. I was in the Beaverton, I guess the Portland area. I know Beaverton's its own city, but last year his arrival was so sudden and so, close to the start of the season, days before camp. And then, so obviously no one knew he would be in Milwaukee or would be a Buck. Look, man, I cover the league, but I cover one team specifically. I don't, I travel, right? So I don't see all the games. I know Damian Lillard clearly. I've watched him play, but you don't, at least in my shoes, you don't see all the games of all the teams all the time, right? So it was like last year was like a who are you, get to know you both from a basketball perspective, from a personal perspective. And thankfully, Dame is a guy who I think Bucks fans saw right away is pretty transparent. He's pretty open. He'll talk to anyone and everyone about everything, right? And so early on, we knew, sort of what was going on in his personal life. Then there were some injuries, and then there was the whole Giannis, and then there's expectations, and then there's coaching. Like last year was just I just covered it, and it felt like a nonstop, horror Ferris wheel, right? Like I don't even know if it was a roller coaster. It was it's like a Ferris wheel that had like things spinning around on it too, right? Like.
Yeah,
and so I can only imagine
got stuck a couple of times. You're just like, I'm very high up. We're not moving. This doesn't feel right.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's like rocking and stuff. So, and then obviously the season ends the way no one on the Bucks wanted it to. So it was only natural, guys, to reach out to talk to Dame. Obviously, he allowed me to build a relationship with him throughout the year, and he didn't have an off season as a Buck last year. He sort of hinted at, or didn't hint, he said, because of all that, he didn't train, he didn't do the things he normally does to a degree. So I'm like, all right, well, he's probably going to do that stuff, right? And so what is that? Like, as a Bucks fan, no one knows. maybe they follow on Instagram, but you're not really like knowing, right, what this specific future Hall of Famer does to get ready, let alone how last year affected him and like the what comes off of that. So yeah, that's sort of the why and the how to a degree, where you build that relationship. He's obviously cool enough with me to invite me out, and then to allow him in his personal space, right? Very clearly a personal space, and it was just that was it. Okay, let's catch up, right? Like I know you said a lot of stuff throughout the year, but now here it is in July, August, as you're getting ready for year two. Let's sort of look back on it, and then also, what are you up to? What is important to you in this off season, and what are you thinking as you head into year two in Milwaukee?
No, absolutely. It's an incredible feature. Again, it'll be in the link will be in the description, all that. Make sure to read it. We're not going to spoil too much of it because we want everyone to read it. But one thing that really came across when reading it was a sense of community that Dame really embodies and tries to maintain from like his time in Portland. Wants to make sure like, yeah, I'm maintaining all these relationships and stuff, even though I don't work there anymore. That's still home. Have you seen that sense of community? Like, again, with the Bucks in years past, Giannis has talked about, Khris has talked about how they view this team as like a community, the franchise as a community. How do you see those really intersecting as you've seen Dame really join this team? Because it seems like two ideals that should really come together and mesh really well, but it's taken a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think broadly, guys, like the organization is a fit with Dame. In terms of that stuff, like it is family oriented. It is, the Bucks do have a pretty deep reach in its players too into the town, into Milwaukee. And I know Dame, like not everything was publicized. I know that he did some things with groups in the city last year, but even sort of. This wasn't necessarily in the piece, but he talked about like, he arrived again 4 days before. Where's he living? Where is kids going to be? The idea, the ability to sort of be a true face in Milwaukee wasn't really there. I do think we'll see some more of that this coming season. To your point, Rohan, I mean, he's like, I still live here, so I'm not just going to suddenly cut off everything I built for over a decade. Just because now my work address is different. And I think Bucks fans, that shouldn't be any sort of, I mean, I know this is NBA culture, guys, like, oh, he's not doing stuff. I mean, come on, right? Like the holidays are probably the best example of a family that, brings their stuff to the city they're in and makes an imprint, and they don't really ever leave it. Right. So yeah, Ron, I do think that communal aspect is important to Dame. It's important to the Bucks. So there's a fit. And then even, if you want to bring that into like the Bucks locker room, again, he didn't have any of this sort of relaxed time with these guys. It was just show up day one with brand new coaches and teammates. And then, oh, by the way, the one coach he did know resigns, 3 weeks later. And you're sort of thrown right in it. And he did talk about, Bobby went to his birthday. He's spent a lot of time talking with guys. The young guys flew to Portland, I believe. They've gone to Phoenix to work out with them. So that even of itself, like you mentioned community, but just in that locker room, it's 100% different because it literally didn't exist last year. So the fact that they're even doing any of that is already, pushing them steps forward that they just, I mean, there were steps they couldn't even take last year.
I've got a bunch of more Bucks questions, and I do want to ask more about the young guys. I want to circle back for a second, and as a journalism guy, I'm kind of laxed, right? Like they say about people who don't go to church anymore. I don't know if it's true at this point, but went to school for it. And from that lens, I need to ask, like the benefit of being able to profile more than even just interview, right? Like really be around and profile someone, kind of where they come from. And obviously 2 years ago, you had the Khris Middleton story going back to South Carolina and getting to meet, and this wasn't, Dame's not from Portland, but really has made it his home, and a lot of his people are around there. Khris, of course, is from there, so his family and everything. Like, how much do you feel that adds to you? Not even just maybe in the particular piece, but just like getting to know and profile someone over a long time, seeing them in their natural environment, not just, at the podium or in the locker room, but like that. And just being able to kind of meet more people who know them to a deeper level than, maybe they're, people who would travel with them or people who are around them with the team.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's huge because, there's going to be your sort of standard press availabilities that are now streamed and videoed all the time after games. Where this stuff comes in is the stuff that's not, on camera or on record. Like there was first a respect level. I think, at least in my experience, this goes back to when I covered the Packers and the Bengals. I've done stuff like this where you're as a journalist. Yeah, I'm serving an audience. They know that I know them through their work, but it's not like I'm taking the time. And the Journal Sentinel, honestly, is showing that they're willing to invest in them as players and as people to then show to the audience, to paint a fuller picture of who they are. How often do we hear this, guys, right? Where like it's criticisms of, media is the catch-all, but it's really social media and the aggregate, right? Like we're not people. You view us as a product, and I think that's what at least I try to do. And the Journal Sentinel allows for guys is to go there. And then I think they really appreciate that. Like not every guy, sure. I ask a ton of guys about meeting them in various places. Some guys aren't ready to go there. Some guys might be, but it takes a long time to get there. And then others happens maybe a little more quickly. But yeah, it definitely develops a better relationship this way. I have a better understanding of just who they are, which helps me do my job because you're just around people, right? Like it might only be a few days, but it's a pretty concentrated amount of time in a very, I don't want to call it a vulnerable setting, but a more vulnerable, right? Like I'm in their space, right? With family, with people who maybe aren't in the forefront or, around us all the time in an arena, that shows them that player has a trust in me. And then it obviously, as long as I'm professional and do the things that I do, that only builds that. So yeah, I think it's important. I wouldn't do it otherwise. The Journal Sentinel wouldn't let me do it if we didn't think it was important. So yeah, man, it's a big deal. And it helps sort of everything from here on forward with all those players, just because you kind of have that shared thing that either no one else has or very few people have. And it helps add to more honest. Ty, real quick, like you mentioned the thing with Khris. So last year before the season began, I'll be honest, it was probably the best interview that, in my opinion, I've ever heard Khris Middleton give, talking about, the wrist surgery, the knee injuries, his father passing, minute restrictions, like all the things in his life that just made, not this last 2 seasons ago, so hard for him. I've never heard him open up in that kind of way and be that way and allow Bucks fans and the public to sort of get in, right? He's so cool and calm all the time. He's not a great quote up on the podium, but that without a doubt, guys, like that type of thing only happens because I was in Charleston for all those days and showed, the world these other parts of him that he was comfortable expressing then later.
Yeah, and
that's
again,
awesome.
Yeah, everyone should read that Khris Middleton feature as well. It still stands the test of time.
Yeah.
You had mentioned like Dame being a very, very transparent person. We've noticed, and I wanted to hear your perspective from someone who's close to the team and around the team a lot. This team talks a lot more than it used to. It's been a transition. You've got some new personalities in here. You've got Doc talking about Khris surgeries at Summer League broadcasts, like, and then that story. It's like, wait, what? Khris did what? Like, what's that transition? Because it's been like a stark transition in like 1 year from a team like Bud, who was like very, very like stoic, not really like, seems like a guy who doesn't want to.
I'll always give to sum up the Bud thing is I remember they had him on the broadcast on like a preseason game, and they just like, what are you looking for? Like one of the most he's just hoping to see some 5-on-5. And it's like, yeah, I think that's guaranteed, Bud. I think we're gonna get that. If we don't get that, it'll be really newsworthy preseason game. So just like the lens we're looking at in terms of what we're getting day to day from the two coaches has been very different, to make Rohan's point. He didn't need me to, but I had to get that in because I always laugh at that.
It's so good. We joke about that all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's that transition been like? Because it's been very stark.
Yeah, and so look, like Drew Holiday was a media guy. Like, and what I mean by that, he was there win or lose, good, bad, and different. If he played well or poorly, if the team did, if there was a controversy. But Drew, we laugh about this on the beat. Drew would also sometimes communicate with 3 words or like a facial expression.
Yeah.
And we'd laugh on the beat and be like, okay, Drew, like we know what you mean by that face, but you gotta say it.
Yeah, say it, please.
Right? And
I can't quote your facial expression.
Yeah. And so but he was an A person, right? But then like, so Dame is an A plus because Dame, good, bad, and different, whatever, but he'll just say all the stuff.
Yeah.
And it is a little different. And he was, out there. And I think some of that is just, he's a top 75 future Hall of Famer. Like, he's so comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't, like, who's going to tell Damian Lillard what to say or what to do type of thing. But it is in contrast to Khris and Giannis and Brook, and Pat, who are good talkers, but I think they're not that Dame is not measured. Dame doesn't fly off and just say wild stuff. But he's just a little more open with certain things. And yeah, I mean, Doc, that's a classic all-time first press conference. He was pilloried for that, right, nationally in a lot of ways, but it clearly was a shift from Bud. I think Adrian wanted to share more, but I think just the situation, in retrospect, either he wasn't comfortable doing it or just it wasn't his nature. He's hadn't fully grasped that yet. And then you go to Doc, who, turned the world on its axis in this first press conference. So it's been, you're right. I mean, oh, by the way, Khris had double ankle surgeries. Was a thing. And I think it wasn't just a thing for us. I think a lot of people were like, well, that's not supposed to be said right now. But he's done that a few times, right? So, even last year, I think Malik Beasley was an interesting personality to have. I don't know Gary Trent Jr. at all. I don't know DeLon Wright or Tayshaun Prince. We'll see. But to your point, guys, yeah, Doc obviously has a much look, I think some of it is old school NBA, like coming up in a time when players had to really be out there to get attention for the league, for themselves, for the team. And then you add in his media, like his own career, where he was paid handsomely to talk about basketball. I think and then is that, so it's just, I'm not going to be mad about it. It's in the olden days when we had notebooks that we had to fill, pregame or postgame. I mean, Doc's a guy, he's an old school notebook filler.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Doc too is I feel like he actually makes him good for this role. Is I almost think, and this is not obviously not knowing him, but just from afar, it just feels like he's so comfortable at this point because he's been through it all as an NBA coach. Obviously, the high highs in 2008, and then. Doc has seen, and I think he actually has seen like all the slander and everything since and what people say. I don't think he cares at all, right? And that's probably what this veteran group needs. I think as maybe we saw early last year, a coach who's like really going to like take every single game, every single story and like kind of live and die to a certain extent may not work. Whereas Doc is just like, yeah, this is the hardest job. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. Like he is just he's an orator. I really feel like he is an orator of his time. And I think it's probably what this team, and also like the strategy, I think he seems like he's simplifying things, which is probably really good for this group. But like in terms of his attitude, I feel like it's been a pretty good fit so far with the Bucks. But I wanted to ask about the Dame part of it all too. One thing that I feel like took getting some adjusting to, and I remember like his opening when they greeted him right before media day when they had the party, he's just like not much of a smiler, I think. But he is very verbose. Did that kind of take an adjustment of like, like his personality, I guess? Because he's a very interesting person, I feel, because he is like, I think he literally said, and it cracked Rohan and I up, like, I'm not just out here smiling, which is very 100% true. But it's not because he's unhappy. That's just who he is. But he is very like, I think verbose is the right word. Like he will speak at length. That the first time he talked about like what he sees when he runs a pick and roll, we were like geeking out. This is great info. This is so interesting to listen to. Like, what was it like kind of getting that rapport with him as a person, given he is not, he speaks, but he's not like, you wouldn't say bubbly by any means, right?
Yeah, you have to, it was interesting because he does keep the same demeanor all the way through everything. The only thing, look, just like we read stories, like I check with other beat writers who had covered him either in Portland or elsewhere, who maybe in the West, who saw him a bunch. I mean, they're just like great talker, same thing, level-headed. If he thinks what you're asking or saying is bogus or BS, he'll call you on it, but it's not gonna turn into a thing. Yeah. He might challenge you if he thinks you're wrong or saying it wrong or whatever it may be, but that's fine. So knowing that, it was interesting, especially after, opening night where he has a great night, right? And, that obviously the one Dame time moment, and even going back to Portland, he's just this way. And so he actually ended up telling me why that is. And he said it was in high school, he hit what he thought was a game winner and celebrated and took his jersey off and, posed for the crowd. But the game wasn't over and you can't take your jersey off. He got teed up and his team lost.
Yeah.
And he was like, that was it. From then on, it became no
serious.
Yeah. And so I think that's just him in his workplace. Like, obviously I was around his family a bit. He's smiling. He's joking, right? Like he's a person, but it's just, I think when he gets into this mode, it's clearly this sort of level. And, it is interesting to read because you don't really know if he's upset. You don't really know if he's like super thrilled. But what's interesting, guys, is the self-awareness with that. Like, that was the whole thing after Doc when I sat with him and he's like, I am happy in Milwaukee, because he was just hearing too much of the body language police.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I think in Portland, if anyone ever talked about Dame with a sour face, I never saw it. I never heard it. And so I think just the NBA stuff, right? Because he wanted to go to Miami first and now he's in Milwaukee. So now this like spotlight's on him. So I'll give him credit for that, like for at least being self-aware and also that and not like faking it, like, oh, let me just like smile around because that's what people are looking for. So yeah, Ty, it was interesting that at least early on to try to sense where he was at. But again, like Drew, pretty level. Like there's really not a whole lot of up and down. And I think that's one of those reasons those guys are Hall of Famers.
Yeah, it seems like you got to learn a lot about Dame as a person during this trip and for this feature. What would you say is the biggest thing you learned about Dame from this trip?
I guess I was curious where like motivations come from, and he ended up saying this again, I think when he was on with Jeff Teague's group about like people get bored with consistency.
Yeah.
I've been kind of doing this thing for 12 years, and it's just whatever, man. Like, who's the 25-year-old who's coming up? He's like, I get that, but it felt like it guys like he fits like a Giannis and an Aaron Rodgers, and then the Bengals AJ Green, who I think was on a Hall of Fame track before he got hurt, and guys like that who are the top of the top, like either All Pro, All NBA, Hall of Famer. Like, what keeps them going? And there's always like the joke with Jordan, right? Like, he would make up some stuff. We know Giannis kind of exaggerates some stuff in his mind about disrespects and slights. And Dame, I think I learned that about him, is he's also in that sort of space, Rohan, of like, all right, well, 26-7 is not good enough, and I felt like crap. Like, okay, well, watch this. You don't believe me that when I say I was hurt and I didn't train. Okay, watch this. And while that may not be a surprising revelation, but shocking, right? An NBA player is like motivated by slights or perceived slights. But I don't know that. I don't know. No one ever knew, like, what, at least in Milwaukee, right, guys? Like, what drove him, what motivated him, what did he play for, what did he, and I think the Steph Curry thing, there was this little kid, Dame, are you better than Steph? And he turns around and just like stares like a hole in this little kid, and it's like, watch this. Right? Like, I mean, it's just one of those things where you again, you can assume it, but that's a problem. You got to know it. And I feel like that was something I really came across. It's like, this dude he is wired in that special way. And it makes me really interested to see how he performs this year, because clearly he feels that kind of way about things people have said about him and the team going into next season.
We'll be back to the interview in just a second, but first, a quick word about America's #1 daily fantasy sports app, which is, of course, our friends at Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. They've got women's basketball, folks. They've got baseball. I'll tell you what, this Jackson Churio kid might be something. I don't know.
He's hot.
Experts are saying his hitter fantasy score on daily fantasy is a great play to make as well. Of course, now that women's basketball is back in session after the international break, Caitlin Clark just dominating. I don't think you can go wrong with sprinkling in some Angel Reese as well, of course, and star Jonquel Jones. Let me not speak negatively on Jonquel Jones' name again for the league-leading New York Liberty. A lot of fun action to take in on Prize Picks. And hey, basketball's close. Football is even closer. There's going to be a lot. This is the time to get set up right now. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Eurostep for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code Eurostep on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now, back to Jim Owczarski, taking the time to talk to us for some reason. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I was going to ask specifically about kind of like that Steph encounter and just his general. It seemed like it came up multiple times throughout the piece of like whether it was just talking about the last season or like specific instances when he was asked. And he's like, and that podcast as well is going to bring up of like, it seems like it really is getting to a maybe more than expected. And I kind of wondered, generally, what is he going to feel about last season? Because it was a tough season for him. It was a tough season for the Bucks. And it seems like, it makes sense. He is an all-75 player. He is as great as he is. You would think this, but as you say, you don't know. Like resolve seems to be the answer, right? And he's talked, a lot about physically as well. And you brought it up that he wasn't able to do his workouts because you have to be able to pass a physical. Did it, and obviously you just saw workouts and like camp things. It wasn't like he played a real game out there, but was there anything you could see differently in like how he was moving, or maybe like how he moved after he was done moving that would give that away? Or is it more kind of just, listening to him and hearing him tell it and what he's thinking?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll just go with what others who would know said. And so Rex Kalami and Donovan Ham were out there for a couple of days as well. Coincidentally, so they ran the workout and they were like, all right, he's in good shape. Not that they had a summer last year either, but they kind of know that Dame's in a space. Just to tease, I did spend some days out there with them. This isn't the only story coming, so we'll have some more on sort of this, but to coming up here right before camp. But his actual workout routine, they've shown some of this stuff with I think Marjan going out there and shooting. He wasn't a guy who was 30 pounds overweight, or didn't look the part. So I think for him, it was just all the stuff that I did that made me an 8-time All-NBA player, I didn't do. And I felt the effects of that. And so it's not so much he's faster or jump or whatever. I think it's just he's just doing that again, or did that again. And the Bucks coaches were impressed. I think another difference time maybe along those lines is they actually ran in their workouts plays, actual sets. This is Giannis. This is you, you screening. This is you take it right. And again, stuff he didn't have last year. So it's not I don't know. I mean, I know whenever I covered football, everyone was always in the best shape of their lives. Maybe he'll say that if someone asks him, but I don't even think it was about that. I think it was just that he did it and then was able to do Bucks specific things in those workouts. It's got him feeling a lot better and quite a lot differently going into the season. It's hard not to feel that way when you have a little bit of a base now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just thinking about this upcoming season, there's a lot that can be improved upon from last year. We already talked about how disappointing last season was. You mentioned there's a lot of new additions. You've got Gary Trent Jr., DeLon Wright, Taurean Prince. This is a lot of change. It's not as much change as it was last year, but it feels like it's a revamped squad, revamped defensive talent, but you retain the brain trust. You still have Giannis, Khris as your teammates. You still have Bobby and Pat are still there. Brook is still there. You still got Doc Rivers as your coach. You may have some new coaching staff additions, but there's still Rex Kalamian is still there. Other guys are still there. Do you feel like this is a player in Damian Lillard who's ready to make that jump this season to be okay, last season was a disappointment. A lot of people were hurt, a lot of mitigating factors, but now this is my time to prove I'm here to win a title.
Yeah, well, I think that was there last year, but look, the Bucks admitted this much when they fired Adrian Griffin. They were not put in a position to do those things.
Yeah.
And he wasn't given the right, this is my opinion, he didn't tell me this, but he wasn't given, and Giannis weren't given the right direction on how to do it either. It was almost, they'll figure it out. Big and small, pick and roll, whatever, right? And then, oh, by the way, there's Khris Middleton, right? Who also had never really been in a role that he was going to move into. And so when Doc was hired, that was the thing. It was, okay, now all of those things are being addressed. How do we do it? The problem was you're doing it with 2.5-hour shoot arounds before a game, occasional practice, and then, Kevin Durant puts his foot under Khris and now he's out for 3 months or 2 months. And okay, well, we don't even know what that looks like, right? Let alone the rest of the injuries. So to your point, to your question, I think he wanted to prove it last year. I don't think that's changed. I just think that they're going to have a better starting point and more tools at their disposal to do that. As we were talking, and he's like, I kind of like how I started saying I didn't really know Dame's game. I didn't watch all these. I mean, he kind of said the same thing. He's like, of course I know who Giannis and Khris are, and I know what they do, but you don't know them as teammates or where they really like to be or how they operate, how they think in certain situations. So it's the fact that they have that now, the fact that Doc is back, and they're probably going to run some of the same stuff he tried to implement last year. So I think it's not a quest to prove it again or a renewed sense. I think it's just a feeling of they can, he can prove, right? Like it felt like I think he felt like he was always chasing either his conditioning or chasing what it should be and what it should look like.
Yeah, there's a real opportunity now.
Yeah, now they have a better opportunity to do it because I think they just know one another a whole lot better.
It's so wild looking back. I don't think there was a single Buck who was comfortable starting last season. Obviously Dame, but the coaching changed to an extent. I mean, Brook is pulled out away from the rim for the first time ever to disastrous results over the first couple of weeks. Malik Beasley, I think did yeoman's work trying, but saying like I'm going to play the Drew role defensively, as much as he was literally doing that, clearly was not the right fit. So I think while you'll still see, I think more from the national perspective, some feedback on the Bucks offseason, like, did they really address things? Did they really get what they needed? I mean, I think personally that their offseason acquisitions for 3 vet minimums were great. People can be underwhelmed with the draft. That's fine. Actually, I'll start with this. Do you feel like part of the draft, obviously taking 2 19-year-olds, AJ Johnson and Tyler Smith, part of this was Jon Horst in the front office kind of not saying, maybe they did say it at one point, but like, it doesn't matter who we take. They're not going to play, right? We could draft the 23-year-old. There's just not room in this team. Do you feel like that it was almost misunderstood? And we were mad day one, I think, of the draft as well. I think we kind of got over it. Seeing AJ Johnson look really fun helped too. But do you think that's kind of the mindset of like, we're going to find these veterans? Maybe we have a couple of recruiters now I want to ask about as well, and Doc and Dame, who seem to kind of do some work out there and make this happen. But is that kind of like the thought you think behind the draft that left a lot of people kind of puzzled?
Yeah. And, Jon Horst, when we asked about this, he's like, well, I never want to put a ceiling on a guy that they can or can't play.
Yeah.
But they're not going to play. Yeah. and so, but I think though, this was probably one of Jon's better summers. Maybe going back to the start of the championship year. And though it's easy to forget that, like, I think DJ Augustine and Torrey Craig were part of that. And then they ended up being flipped in the deals that got Tucker. The ideas were right, like a backup point guard, a defensive wing, etc. I do think you can only work with what you had, which were minimums. So that shrinks the pool. So all things considered, I think DeLon Wright can play some backup point. Gary Trent's a starter at the off guard. And I do think there's some defensive potential there. And it's not even potential. I think we've seen him play defense at times in Portland. I don't really know what went on in Toronto last year.
Not much good.
Yeah. And maybe he'll talk about that. Yeah. Maybe he'll talk about that whenever we get a chance to meet him. Prince, I think, again, is that defensive wing who can still play, as opposed to this investment they had been making in 33 to 36-year-olds last 3 years, which just didn't work. Yeah. So, and you mentioned Beasley. Like, it's so easy to forget that he was signed to be the 8th or 9th man at the time.
And to play with Drew. That's the thing.
And to play with Drew.
They built a roster with Drew and then got the opposite point guard, and no wonder it didn't work.
Yeah. And so I think they just did the best they could.
Yeah.
And look, Beasley had a great offensive season, career best. I mean, that's usually what happens with shooters when they come to Milwaukee, right? With Giannis. So I think the fact that Jon was able to, whatever the little pool was, to really target around Dame and Giannis and Khris in a way that he didn't and couldn't last year sets them up better. I get people are mad at Pat and Bobby and Brook because they've been here for so long. It's the nature of the beast. But if you look at their top 8, because let's be real, it's only 8. Only 8 are playing, maybe 8.5.
The
when it gets to crunch time. They're in a better place now than they were a year ago, at least to me. Yeah. And so, there's going to be flaws. It is what it is. But, if those 3 guys are healthy, again, they're just in a better spot. And that's how I viewed the draft was, again, Ty, they don't have picks. So unless they somehow trade, Khris would have to opt in and then they could trade him. I don't know the rule. I forget the rules offhand. If he opt out, re-signed, like they don't have anybody to trade. So like they may not have any picks next year. So to me, this was like, these were first round picks for 24 and 25.
Yeah.
Because they don't have any, as we currently sit. And so that was just like, all right, well, let's take some flyers on some real potential, because we're not going to be able to get guys like this. That's how I viewed at least this draft also.
Yeah, especially it was such a weird draft as well, and not like a ton of good prospects. It was all over the place. So I had mentioned we were a little bit upset. We had our guys. My guy Kelly Ware went too early. That would have been so good, but unfortunately, it had to be Miami.
It's always Miami.
But yeah, I feel like there's a lot more flexibility with this team this season. You mentioned DeLon Wright is a guy who's going to be like a backup point. He can be a backup combo guard. Ty and I've talked. I could see him closing games next to Dame. You see a guy like Taurean Prince. He's probably a more flexible option than Bobby Portis as a backup, like sort of 3-4-ish. I mean, Bobby's not a 5. He's not a 3. He's barely a 4. We'll see. That's a whole different discussion, but I feel like this team is a lot more flexible this year than it had been in years past, especially last season. Like Ty had mentioned, there was a lot of building around a Drew Holiday team. And like you mentioned, Malik Beasley, he probably was he going to start over Grayson Allen? Who knows if Grayson Allen was
probably
still
not.
There. Yeah. But this team is more geared. You can have your offensive geared lineups with Damian Lillard, Gary Trent Jr. out there in the backcourt. Obviously, Giannis, Khris, and Brook. You can go a little bit smaller now with Giannis at the 5 at some points with Taurean Prince there. I feel like he's the closest they've gotten to sort of a tweener forward that can really unlock Giannis at the 5 that they've had since PJ Tucker in the championship year. So it feels like this team is a lot more flexible and ready to play different styles. And I think that's probably going to be something that Doc really values. Is that like a shared sentiment there, that this team's really flexible?
For sure. And that's sort of the irony about this, is that's what Adrian Griffin wanted to do also, was to create these different things. Brook out on the perimeter in a pick right, and being able to switch if need be at times. And guess what? We saw that in the playoffs, and we saw zone. Doc, I was texting people who had covered him. I mean, he had never run as much zone as the Bucks did last year, but they got pretty good at it. And why did they get good at it? Because they ran it under Adrian Griffin a whole bunch. Now, granted, maybe the way they got to that zone had its flaws, but they still got there. And it was funny at the end of the year, guys, talking to them. The players all acknowledged that, like that they wanted. One of the reasons Bud also was fired was the lack of flexibility on defense. And it is what it is, and this is what we do. And they wanted some variety. It's just Adrian at the time, obviously, again, they fired him. They didn't feel he was getting it out of them the right way. But Doc did a lot of that same stuff. Doc also wants a variety of defense. Does it mean we're going to see Brook chasing around Mikal Bridges for 20 seconds like he did in that Brooklyn game, which, by the way, is still one of the greatest individual efforts I've seen?
He really tried.
Yeah.
I mean, he made him shoot a contested mid-range shot at the end of a shot. I mean, it was insane.
The funniest part of that whole thing, I feel like Brook maybe wasn't the big issue. It was nobody else was used to we don't have Brook there. Like, how do we do this?
Right. So to your point, Ron, I do think there is flexibility. Gary Trent, look, deflections, steal, again, stuff we heard about last camp, right? Active hands, getting stuff. So I think the players will buy into that because that's what they want to do. That's what Doc wants to do. We'll see what it looks like, obviously, and how they match up some lineups. So we all know Giannis doesn't want to play a ton of minutes at the 5. And frankly, he's probably best with Brook, right? Roaming around and doing the Giannis stuff on the back end, on the help side. So, but yeah, I do think, DeLon Wright's 32. I think he looks different than, say, Wesley Matthews did at 34 or 33, right? When he came back, or George Hill.
Yeah.
Right. He doesn't have sort of the injury history that they were always trying to manage. And clearly Prince is not He's not quite where Jay is or was. So yeah, I do think at least heading into the championship season, or like the championship season, they sign guys who could still give you those minutes. And I do agree. I believe they can, and that they're better positioned to do some different things.
Yeah, I really am interested in the idea of how the young guys fit in, right? Because there's the classic, the Docism stuff, like he never plays the young guys, like it has to be like a Tyrese Maxey level player. But we did see, I think, like AJ Green, for example, became a very standard part of the rotation, and we saw, Andre Jackson Jr. at times wasn't. I think played more under Griffin because they really needed that burst in that defense. And then, of course, you have this summer where Khris Livingston has a really, really good summer league and kind of seems like he can do some of those, stretch four things that they have really been looking for since Tucker and haven't really found sustainably since Tucker. And we'll see how much Prince can do. We'll see if Khris Middleton can size up a little. But what I guess is your expectation? You talked about like the top 8 is what matters. You can fill that top 8 with all vets if you want to. But do you think some of those young guys, even a Green who like, I barely count as a young guy at this point. Like, didn't even have to go to summer league. I feel like that says a little bit about where he may be at. But what is your thought on like how competitive this rotation is going to be? Because it seems you can get to like 10, 11 deep of guys that maybe you don't feel like they could close a playoff game, but you think they're an NBA player most likely, or at least have the right to compete to be one.
Yeah, look, and that's the hard part about teams like the Bucks. It's sort of like the regular season's just sort of pushed aside and it's all about the playoffs, but they still have to play 82 games. And obviously Giannis and Damian had soft tissue issues at the end of the year. Khris, again, just bad luck with people sticking their feet under his feet twice. So that, like Khris, I know people will get mad about, oh, he's injury prone, whatever. That's a different thing to me. But they still may slow play his return. As we have seen, they tend to minute manage Khris. I'm sure he'll tell us on media day, no, I don't expect it. And then he'll play like 18 minutes in game 1 for like a week and a half. So to your point, they need everybody else to play. Like, I don't think Giannis is going to play 37 minutes anymore. Like, I don't think Dame's going to play whatever. Right. So that has to get filled in. To your point, AJ Green, to me, was a rotation player under Doc. I just looked it up, 14 and a half minutes per game when he played. That's a rotation player. Yeah. Jackson Jr. is probably below that. And then I think MarJon will get another opportunity.
You think so?
I mean,
Doc did not.
Somebody's got to fill the minute. That's what I'm saying, Rohan.
TV thing. Doc did not have a great thing to say about MarJon, which again was for us like, did he say that out loud?
Yeah, television? He did say it out loud. And the reason I say that is, I say it. Look, when MarJon played, it was always because Joe Ingles was hurt, Khris was hurt, Jay was hurt. Like, he was filling in, right?
Yeah.
I'm sort of assuming that Khris is going to be on a restriction because history has shown that. So now there's a bunch of minutes. AJ's not going to fill that role. Jackson Jr., maybe, but we don't really know his offense, right? Like, so I think MarJon at least has shown when he's played in that spot, he can hit a couple threes. He's big, etc. So I'm not predicting that Ron is fair. I mean, that's what Doc said.
Yeah.
Right? We'll see. But I do think like those guys are going to have to play. Khris Livingston's interesting, right? Like, I'm sure it's the same, but we'll see all these guys play a bunch in the preseason. They're all going to flash because that's what they do in preseason games. But I do think Green and Jackson Jr. to me have roles. I think Andre comes in when he came in against Indiana. You need a disruptor. You need someone to just make life hell on somebody. And then, go get a board, give us that boost. And if his shot is really improved, if that confidence is up, I think that adds to time. I think for AJ Green, I think he's got Doc's trust. I think he's a better team defender than he's given a little bit of credit for. Maybe he gets some different whistles this year, right? Like, I feel like he was in position to get some calls that a second-year undrafted guy wouldn't. Yeah. And then we know everyone trusts him to put it up. So those are the young guys. I think the new draft picks and whatnot. That's, blowouts, major injury issues happening.
Second out of back-to-backs. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think Ty's going to see a lot of them in Oshkosh.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully they're playing in Oshkosh. It sounds like it, but
right. And look, we can't underestimate this either. Like, even if Khris is on a restriction, the big three didn't play a lot with Doc. Yeah. Now, their total minutes, you go into the filters, the games played total minutes will look decent. But that was not with Doc Rivers, and that was not with what he was trying to do with Damon Giannis. So I do think they'll try to get those three together a lot more in the beginning of the year, and then we'll have to see how they fill in those minutes otherwise.
Yeah, your random just like late January blowout against Charlotte. Like those games came back. Yeah, there's 16 back-to-backs.
Yeah,
most in the NBA.
Yeah.
It's a weird schedule. We Ty and I talked about this on Bleacher Report, but we were just like, what's going on? Like that late March stretch where there's just like brutal. It's brutal. There's so many teams above 500 in a row. I think it's like 13 or something.
I think somebody shared. I don't know if they play a team that had a losing record last year, like almost the whole month or the whole month. That's going to be the tester month, I think.
Yeah.
And for you, I'm sure, Jim, because I think after March 8th, they don't have more than one consecutive off day at any point for the rest of the month. So it's going to be a busy one.
We all in the NBA community hope that the league figured out some way to do this cup tournament. Like they learned some lessons, and I don't know if they did. I feel like it's the same mishmash of stuff in November, December, which then creates all this other stuff later on. It is. That's a problem.
Teams. I think what did we pull? Who was it? Like the Wizards or the Raptors? Like they play some teams like 4 times like the first 8 weeks, which is just so bizarre. I think the Celtics, they don't play at all in 2025. Right. And that gets really weird in a playoff setting because pre-trade deadline. Like I don't know if those two teams will make a lot of moves, but they could be totally different. They're not going to have seen each other in so long. It is not an ideal way to schedule. I'll say that.
Yeah.
It's definitely that'll be maybe they've gone through it last year because it is kind of similar in that way, with a lot of ping-ponging around the first 2 months and some long West Coast trips after the All-Star break. Look, you can only play what they put out in front of you, and I'm sure they'll say, well, if we're the team we believe we can be, we'll handle business.
Yeah. I mean, this is a team who believes they can win a title. Rightfully so, and should be like one of the top seeds in the Eastern Conference this year. I mean, that's going to be a little difficult considering there's been a lot of moves. The Celtics are the Celtics. They kept all their guys and they should be a juggernaut again. The Knicks, they got Mikal Bridges. They lost Hartenstein, but there's an upgrade in talent there, and should have a healthy Julius Randle this season, hopefully. And the Sixers, obviously, you make a big splash, get Paul George, get the mishmash of other players on. What a weird team the Philadelphia 76ers is. They're going to be so weird to watch.
LeBron, Slayer, Gershon Yabusele.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. It's, good for them. Good for him. But this, like the top of the East has started to load up a little bit. I mean, this has always been the weaker conference for a while now, and the bottom is just abysmal. But how do you see the Bucks really faring at the top of the East this year? I mean, do you see them having like a better record than like the Sixers, the Knicks, or those type of teams, or do you see them more as it feels disrespectful to say with the Cavs, but like with the Cavs?
Right. Look, I mean, the Cavs, they were a second round team. Their current construct gives the Bucks problems. They're one of the only teams that actually has the size to match up with Brook and Giannis, and they beat them up. I mean, physically, like those are tough games. So this is interesting. Like, okay, well, let's put Boston aside. Champions, 60 wins, continuity. They check all the boxes.
Yeah.
So I think it is fair and right to go into this season. They are the favorites. They are the favorites to be the 1 seed. Legitimate questions, though, with the amount of basketball that Tatum and Holiday and White have played, Porzingis injury history.
Not going to be healthy to start the season.
Yeah, legitimate questions and concern, right? But that's any team, so they're number one. I'm not going to get into win totals because win totals have been depressed of late. I think 2 years ago, Bucks won 53 games and were the 1 seed or something, right? So let's just talk about seeding. If they're healthy, let's assume everyone's healthy, all teams. I think the Bucks are a solid 2 seed.
Yeah,
flirting with the 1. And the reason I say that is still you roll out the ball, they're still going to have 2 of the 4 best players on the court, and if not the best 2, and 3 of the best 5 or 6, and 4 of the best not 10, right? So that their high-end talent alone, and there's the continuity factor. Other than Drew coming in, big 3, Bucks win a title. But these constructs of super teams or big additions rarely pan out in year 1. And Drew, I'd argue, we called them the big 3, but I don't think anybody would say Drew Holiday was a level of player.
He was the Pokemon evolution of Eric Bledsoe. It's a similar role. You don't have to bash him in there.
And so, Dame and I talked about this. He liked the fact when I said, look at Minnesota.
Yeah.
2 seasons ago, Wiley Pillary, Rudy, how could you do this? What's the fit? It's terrible. Guys get hurt. They're bounced in the first round. Oh my God, this is awful, awful, awful. Well, then they had a year together. They come back. They're healthy. And if Cat doesn't get hurt, they win 60 games. Right?
Yeah.
And they're knocking on the door of the finals. Dame's counter was also Dallas. They get Kyrie. What a disaster. These 2 can't do any of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. They go to the finals next year. So I don't think New York's going to worry about the continuity. I think Bridge is going to fit in with his former teammates pretty well. But we'll see about Julius Randle, Rohan. I mean, he wasn't there for that. And his needs and skill set, we'll find out. But I do think the Knicks and Bucks are there. And for as good as Philly's top end talent is with Paul and Joel, and I know Paul is as close to a plug and play star that there is. And I know Tyrese and Joel have history. That whole team, they had 2 guys under contract. Their whole team is new. And while I have a huge respect for Nick Nurse, again, unless they're going to buck history as one of the first teams to ever totally be revamped. And then, oh, by the way, Joel's never been out of the second. Paul, that's even beyond their own health stuff. So, yeah, guys, the Cavs, I think, are solid. They're going to be a pain. They're going to be good. 4 seed. I think Orlando is going to be good. A pain. 4 seed. I think those are your 4 or 5 seeds. With Philly in there, So that top 6 is going to be strong. And, Miami is Miami.
Indiana, of course. The Pacers will always be in the mix, I think, in that lower part.
Yeah, I mean, Pacers are a whole other conversation. Again, respect on their name. They went to the finals. They did what they had to do. I think we'll just have to see how that
again. Let's see you do it again.
Prove you're not the 2021 Hawks. Let's just see it.
Yeah, look, it's a good conference. In that top 6, 7, 8, clearly, right? The Bucks, and look, the Bucks have earned their skepticism. We can talk about Giannis not playing and Khris being hurt and Dame being hurt. They have been bounced in the first round last 2 years. Second round the year before. They've earned that skepticism with that. But again, assuming everybody's healthy, I do think they have every expectation to get to the finals and compete, win another championship.
And healthy-ish, right? If the big 3 combine to miss 30 games, you're like, okay, sure. Yeah, if they all play 72, you'll totally take that. I think I'm with you. I put them second when I ranked. I think I did Knicks next. I do think it's going to be interesting, who does play, who doesn't play a lot, who doesn't play as much. Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo played a ton for them on this run. if OG and Bridges are there and healthy, how much are they? It's just going to be interesting. I think it's going to be actually very hard for Tibbs. It's a good problem.
What do you mean? Josh Hart is their new center.
Maybe he is actually. So maybe he'll be fine. We'll see how Dante adjusts. But also, I think for the Bucks case, I think they had like the best 4-man group to play at least 500 minutes or something in terms of regular season net rating. Like when the big three and Brook, of course, were out there together. So even with all the disasters we talked about, with a coach who didn't make it through the season, they were annihilating teams with Dame and Giannis looking awkward, everything else. I wanted to ask about Brook because I feel like maybe the biggest Bucks storyline this offseason is he going to get traded? Is he on the trade block? There was some buzz. It seems like maybe now was coming from other teams. And I know Jon Horst at one of the press conferences basically came out and was like, we want him to retire here, with the exact opposite of he's being shopped. He's always been fascinating. I think Indiana was such a bad matchup for him. Some of the fans were thinking, he's done. He can't play anymore. I think if they play Orlando in the first round, everyone has the exact opposite take on his usefulness. But he's so hard to replace, right? They've tried at very low cost. Rohan mentioned Ware, who they didn't even have a chance to take. There's just not many players who can do what he does in the league at all, which maybe is why teams would be calling. But what is kind of do you think there was ever a world, like if the draft falls differently and they get Ware, or if the offer came in where they really trade Brook, or was this more, teams are interested because he is this rare archetype and the Bucks would really have to be blown away to consider that, given you ask any player, it seems like they all agree we need this guy back there. Nobody else can or will do what he does.
Yeah, I think it's independent of the draft. Like, I don't think, like, the goal is for them to win a title this year. And I don't think there was a Derek Lively in this draft. Maybe we might find one, but at least going in, who could be a high level rim protector, rim runner, that the Bucks could actually get. So I don't think a rookie. I think it's that stuff was independent of the draft. As for, there's too much smoke. There's too much smoke. Like, he's on an expiring deal. Why wouldn't Houston, who tried to sign him, or the Lakers, who had him and then really regretted letting him go, or whomever else, not want Brook Lopez? So I think there's a difference between being shopped and offers and people calling to say, what would it take? I think the bar is high. They still want to win a title. So if you're going to move a guy who can help you win one, who is coming in at $23 million or less, because the restrictions, that you can legitimately say, we're going to win a championship with him at the 5, elite rim protection, because that's still what would be needed. I think where this conversation comes from is the offensive fit is different. With Dame, you don't really need a stretch 5 anymore. And Brook is a willing screener, and Brook screens well. His pick and roll with Dame was nice, but the role wasn't really like rim running and I'm going to go dunk on your head. It was, well, I'm going to flare out over here and get this 3 or short, and we know Giannis got to work on the short roll, all that stuff. But I think that's where maybe some of the conversation was when you have Dame's, gravity and Giannis's gravity, it's just different. You don't surround Giannis with shooters. It's still true, but when one of them is Damian Lillard, the needs are different. And I think maybe that's where that conversation was a part of, maybe we need a big guy who's just crashing that rim more often, and rolling hard down there and being that threat. And Brook's 37. I mean, his game has changed. Yeah. That's it. So we'll see. We'll see what Doc does with some of that stuff. Like last year, I think they really got away from Brooklyn Brook. Remember that? But sometimes Bud would do 2-3 plays at the start of the game with him posted up on the block. Yeah. We'll see if some of that is worked back in. But yeah, I think he's still a championship level defender, and obviously we know he's a spacer. I think it's more just how that all fits again with Dame and Khris and Giannis and what Doc wants to do with it. We just frankly didn't get a chance to see a lot of that last year.
Yeah,
or what the goal was.
Yeah,
100%. I think a lot of it also plays into Ty and I talked about whether what Brook Lopez trades would look like, and it's a lot of the times is to bring in like, hey, we need a starting shooting guard. Like, it's not going to be Malik. This is pre Malik Beasley signing elsewhere. It's like, yeah, it's not going to be Malik Beasley, and then a starter quality guy just walks in on a minimum, and Gary Trent Jr. It's like, oh, you don't really need that anymore. Like, it's there.
Yeah, and that's like the hard part of like and I get it. Like the conversations are fun and they need to be had, but my baseline is, the trade machine's great, but like, yeah, Giannis isn't playing center. Bobby's not a center. Tyler Smith is not playing center to win a title. Like, it's just
that
like
report was nuts.
It was so funny. It's like, oh yeah,
he can't play a single number on defense right now, much less 5, which is the hardest one.
So that, like, I get it. Like, it's a thing, right? The Bucks needed to do all these moves, whatever. And again, as I said earlier, Bobby, Pat, and Brook are kind of the poster child for fan boredom at this point. But it's just, it's a need. Like, I think if they were going to make a move of that kind, it would have to be for another big who can be an elite rim protector. Okay, well, again, that list is real small. And, the answer coming back was never like, nah, are you really winning a championship with that guy? Like, really? So, we'll see.
It's like hypotheticals like Keldon Johnson. It's just like, I don't know what Keldon Johnson does right now. Like, that's fun. Like on 2K, like, oh yeah, in 5 years maybe he'll be really good. They can't play that game. It's got to be like, can you step in right now?
Right.
It's the same as the Khris conversation to me, right? Every year there's the sect of fans like they got to just trade Khris for someone younger who does all the same things and it's just as good. Like, A, find the player. Good luck. B, why is the other team like, yeah, I want the older version of this guy?
Yeah, right. I mean, it takes 2 to tango, or nowadays 3 or 4. And so that is the look. I'm not saying Khris couldn't be traded or Brook couldn't be traded, and maybe in February, there is a conversation about those things, or January, whatever it may be. But I think it's just not that easy when you're talking about high level players who have already won a championship and still are showing you the ability to still play at a high level. It's just not you're right. It's just the fits elsewhere. To your point, let's just get rid of the younger guy for the older guy, right? Like the other team, and the Bucks have no draft capital to attach to this stuff. I mean, like there's so many like issues with it, but I get it though. It's fun. People want to talk about it. I don't begrudge that at all. But it's like the actual conversation though is far more difficult and harder to have.
Yeah, and not even to mention like the human aspect of like, Giannis has played with Khris for over a decade and they talk about how much they enjoy that. And that's a whole nother, I mean, I really think it was hard for them to do the Dame trade. I don't think the front office was like, they obviously jumped at it. They got it done, but it's not like it's not my GM on 2K. It is like, we are trading our champion, a pillar of our community and our team and a great player. And, now of course everyone has the different takes and there's the whole true on the Celtics aspect of it, but it's all harder than people think. I think emotionally as well as like literally making trades, but it is fun to talk about. So, and we certainly talk about it. So can't rail about it too much, but it is, I think it's just good context.
Yeah. Makes for good content. I know do we have anything else we need to talk to Jim Owczarski here about, Ty?
Well, I'm really excited for the next article. I mean, Jim, is there anything, I guess, that is kind of on your mind this offseason, covering the Bucks and that you feel is maybe underreported or just that you've been thinking about and finding interesting? I think we can go out on that, but would love to hear just, obviously there's the, Dame trip and major things, Giannis, the Olympics, all this, but is there anything that you feel like maybe is getting lost in all this chatter about trades or whatever else?
Yeah, I think what's lost is, even locally to a degree, guys, is just how good this team is. I know national podcasts, like there's been a couple people who have been like, hey, wait a minute. Giannis is still really good. Yeah. This team's still really good. And they're a really good team. And I know it's been a real sour taste since the parade, for a variety of reasons, but for a really good team to be sort of wholly dismissed by people in my view should know better. I think is interesting. The Bucks start 25-3. That'll all change, and they'll go back to the what everybody thought and expected. But at least for now, I think Giannis has sort of been lost in the mix as an MVP-ish candidate. I think people do believe Dame has fallen off. I think, Khris takes his slings and arrows even locally. Doc comes with his criticism. So, like, this team has got some baked in, I don't want to call them narratives. I hate that word, but there's some baked in concerns or things that people just sort of latch onto right away that I think, like, they're really good. I mean, they were the 2 seed the whole season until the last week when Giannis and Dame got hurt.
Yeah.
And it was even with some of the, I was going to swear, even some of the foolishness that they were doing, like losing to Washington on that, right? Like they still were going to be the 2 seed. So, yeah, I think that's what I'm leaving on, guys, is like, this is still a really good basketball team that can win the championship this year. It just seems like they've, for their own failures the last couple years and then success and new fun changes elsewhere, they've just sort of been forgotten about. But I don't think they've been left behind. We'll put it that way.
I love that. That is great. Thank you so much, Jim, for being very generous with your time and everything. We appreciate it. We'll have to circle back. I'm really excited now to read the other Dame pieces.
Yeah, I can't wait for that.
Great tease. Everyone subscribe. But Rohan, do you want to take us out here?
Yeah, again, make sure you check out the Dame feature. Keep your eyes out for the next stuff coming. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, following Jim for all his great coverage throughout the Milwaukee Bucks season, because it's almost that time of year, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you again for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening, watching this. Make sure you check out gspn.info for all of our links, all that fun stuff. Pod Random. We'll talk to you next time.